There I stood, right in the middle of my wrecked cornfield, watching in stunned disbelief as that red Jeep Wrangler plowed through thousands of dollars worth of crops. Behind the wheel sat the HOA president, gripping the steering wheel with the smug confidence of someone who thought she could do whatever she pleased. She had the nerve to tell me she was well within her rights to drive across my farm. 3 generations of backbreaking work meant absolutely nothing to her. But what she didn't know that morning was that I owned the land beneath their $1 million clubhouse, and the keys to a bulldozer were already in my pocket. How did this self-important HOA dictator end up watching in horror as I tore down their beloved infinity pool while the whole neighborhood cheered me on? Well, let me tell you, my name is Dylan Harmon. I'm 58 years old and the proud owner of Carter Family Farms. My grandfather bought this land, 200 acres of it, back in 1937, scraping together every penny he'd earned working double shifts at the factory while growing food for his family on rented land. He paid in cash, saved over years of sacrifice. This farm isn't just a piece of land to us. It's our history, our legacy. Every inch of this soil holds the sweat, blood, and tears of my family. I've still got the calluses to prove it, just like my father did before me and his father before him. For more than 80 years, we've grown corn, soybeans, and wheat, crops that didn't just feed our family, but also helped sustain the community and half the county. When I was a kid, this farm was surrounded by other family-owned farms and open countryside. The closest neighbor lived a quarter-mile down the road, and everyone understood the unwritten rules of country life. Respect other people's property, lend a hand when needed, and recognize that farming comes with early mornings, a little dust, and the honest smells of working the land. But all of that changed about 15 years ago when the developers rolled in and broke ground on Maple Creek Estates. Suddenly, my eastern property line bordered rows of identical cookie-cutter mansions, each boasting a 3-car garage and pristine, chemically treated lawns that never seemed to have kids playing on them. They put up fancy stone entrance gates with gold-lettered signs and gave the streets pretentious names like Grand Wellington Drive and Buckingham Court. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I tried to be reasonable. Farmers know better than most that you either adapt or get left behind. I even made an effort to keep the peace. I agreed to leave a 50-foot buffer of wildflowers between my crops and their property to make the view more appealing. I let them use my north field for their 4th of July picnics and Easter egg hunts. And for the most part, the residents weren't bad folks. Some actually liked having farmland behind their houses. A few even brought their grandkids out to watch the harvest or stop by my roadside stand to buy fresh sweet corn. But then Sophia Jennings took over as HOA president, and everything changed. Sophia was a 55-year-old former corporate executive who knew absolutely nothing about farming, but acted like my land was a blemish on her perfect suburban paradise. From the moment she took office, she treated my farm like a nuisance. The complaint letters started rolling in like clockwork. My tractors were too loud during planting season. The dust on dry days was unacceptable, and heaven forbid a whiff of natural fertilizer drifted toward her manicured subdivision. I tried explaining politely at first that this farm had been here for 80 years, long before Maple Creek Estates existed. I even invited her to visit, to see for herself what we do, and why some aspects of farming can't just be rescheduled for the convenience of an HOA. She refused, saying her time was too valuable for agricultural tourism. That should have been my first clue that things were only going to get worse. But even I couldn't have predicted just how far Sophia would go to impose her imaginary authority over my land. It happened on August 23rd last year, a date burned into my memory alongside my wedding anniversary and my kids' birthdays. The corn was perfect that season, tall, golden, heavy with promise. After 2 years of drought followed by a season of flooding, we were finally looking at a bumper crop, enough to pay off the new irrigation system and maybe set aside a little for my grandson Jake's college fund. That morning was crisp and clear, a rare treat for late summer. I was in the southeast field, the one bordering Maple Creek Estates, checking moisture levels and feeling optimistic about the harvest ahead. Then I heard it, an engine revving, loud and aggressive. Not the steady hum of a tractor or harvester, but the growl of something built for showing off, not working the land. At first, I figured maybe some teenager had accidentally wandered onto the property, something that had happened before. Usually, they were quick to apologize and back out. But when I crested the hill and saw what was happening, my heart just about stopped. A bright red Jeep Wrangler with oversized tires and a personalized HOA vanity plate was tearing straight through my prime cornfield. This wasn't a lost driver or an accident. The Jeep was deliberately plowing through row after row of fully mature corn, flattening thousands of dollars worth of crops like it was some kind of off-road playground. I grabbed my radio, my hands shaking with anger, and called Jake, who was working in the north section. "Someone's driving through the southeast corn," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Get down here. Now." By the time Ethan arrived in his pickup, I'd already made it to the edge of the destruction. The Jeep had finally come to a stop, not because the driver had a change of heart, but because it had gotten stuck in a muddy dip where the irrigation line ran. Behind it, nearly 3 acres of corn lay crushed, more than $32,000 worth of damage in just a few minutes. The driver's side door swung open, and out stepped Sophia Jennings. She was dressed like she was about to give a corporate presentation. Crisp blue blazer embroidered with the Maple Creek Estates logo, perfectly pressed khaki pants, and brand new hiking boots that had clearly never seen an actual trail. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun, not a single strand out of place, despite the destruction she just caused. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" I shouted, my hands still shaking as I looked around at the devastation. Sophia barely acknowledged the mess she'd made. She casually dusted off her sleeve, then looked me dead in the eye and said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world, "I'm conducting an official HOA property line inspection. We've had complaints that your farming is encroaching on community land." Jake, normally the calm one, lost it. "There's a service road around the perimeter for access. You just destroyed our entire southeast section." Sophia rolled her eyes like we were a couple of children making a fuss over nothing. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. The HOA had every legal right to inspect property boundaries, and I needed to witness it myself. According to Barbara, my so-called outdated farming practices were supposedly lowering property values and negatively affecting the neighborhood's quality of life. Something, in her opinion, that needed to be dealt with immediately. But when I pointed out that she was trespassing and had caused severe damage, actual criminal damage, to our crops, she just laughed. "Trespassing? Please," she scoffed. "I'm simply ensuring compliance with community standards." Then, as if to solidify her authority, she reached into her blazer pocket and handed me a business card, the HOA logo gleaming in gold foil. "If you have any complaints, direct them to our legal department. This is nothing more than a boundary dispute." With that, she turned her back on us, pulled out her phone, and ignored the destruction she'd just left behind. I overheard her giving her location to a towing company, stating she was at the edge of Carter Farm where it bordered Maple Creek Estates. Half an hour later, a tow truck showed up, along with 2 more HOA board members who stood there with their arms crossed, glaring at us like we were the ones causing trouble. The process of dragging Barbara's Jeep out of the mud only made things worse. The tow truck shredded through even more rows of corn, digging deep trenches in the soil that would take years to restore. Before leaving, Sophia threw out one last insult. "Oh, and expect a bill for the tow service. Your poorly maintained field damaged my Jeep's undercarriage." She smirked. "You really ought to post warnings about those irrigation ditches." That night, sleep didn't come easy. 3 acres of prime corn, gone. $32,000 worth of crops, wiped out by one entitled woman's reckless joyride. The sheriff had come, taken photos, and filed a report, but ultimately dismissed it as a civil matter, despite the obvious destruction. My insurance adjuster confirmed the numbers, $32,000 in lost crops, plus at least $5,000 in soil remediation to repair the compacted ruts. For the next 3 days, I was trapped in a haze of frustration and helplessness. The initial shock had passed, replaced by the sinking realization that Sophia would likely walk away from this unscathed. The HOA had deeper pockets than I did, and they'd drag any lawsuit out until I either ran out of money or patience. On the 4th day, Ethan came up with a suggestion. "We need to go through all our property records, Grandpa. If she's claiming we encroached on their land, we need solid proof that we didn't. At first, I figured he just wanted to give me something to do, keep my mind occupied. But I agreed anyway. We dug through every piece of paperwork tied to the farm, deeds, surveys, tax records, even the original sale documents from when the developers purchased the adjacent land from Maple Creek Estates. I even made a trip to the county records office to get the original plat maps from when the subdivision was approved. What I found made my heart race in a way it hadn't since Olivia said yes to marrying me 45 years ago. Turns out, when Maple Creek Estates was developed, the builders had made a catastrophic mistake. Their crown jewel, a 12,000 square foot clubhouse with an infinity pool, tennis courts, and a high-end fitness center, had been partially constructed on a 2.8-acre parcel that still legally belonged to me. The history behind the parcel was complicated. Back in 1962, my father had briefly sold the land to my uncle during a rough financial stretch, with a buyback agreement in place. 2 years later, it was deeded back to our family. That transaction, however, created a separate legal description in the county records. When the developers surveyed the area 15 years ago, they somehow missed that small but crucial detail. The result? Their prized clubhouse, the heart of their community, the feature they flaunted in every piece of marketing, encroached a full 75 feet onto my land. The eastern wall of the main building, half their infinity pool, and an entire tennis court were all sitting on property that had been in my family for generations. I couldn't believe it. I checked and rechecked every document, comparing the original property descriptions with the county GIS maps. There was no mistake. The so-called premier amenity of Maple Creek Estates was illegally built on my land by a far greater margin than any of my crops had ever crossed their boundary. I immediately called Lucas Richardson, our family attorney. He reviewed everything and was stunned. Frank, this isn't some minor encroachment. They built a multi-million-dollar facility partially on your land, without permission or compensation. You have every legal right to demand its removal. And what about compensation for my crops? I asked. Lucas let out a low whistle. The crop damage gives you some leverage, but this clubhouse situation? That's a nuclear option. They'll fight the crop claim, but property deeds and recorded surveys? They can't argue with that. For the first time since watching Barbara's Jeep flatten my corn, I felt something close to hope. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about something bigger. Respect. Respect for property, for boundaries, and for the agricultural roots that had sustained this land long before fancy subdivisions popped up. Armed with certified surveys, property deeds, and a legal letter from Lucas outlining my position, I called for an emergency HOA board meeting. They reluctantly agreed, probably assuming I was coming to beg for crop damage compensation. The meeting was set for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, inside the very clubhouse that sat partially on my land. When I arrived, 5 board members sat at a polished mahogany table, with Sophia at the head, wearing her usual smug expression. As I walked in, she let out a dramatic sigh. Mr. Carter, we understand you're upset about our necessary property line inspection, but this meeting is just a courtesy. Our legal team has determined. I cut her off by laying out the certified survey maps across the table. Before you continue, I think you should know, you're all currently trespassing. The room went dead silent. Sophia blinked rapidly, a flicker of doubt flashing across her face for the first time since I'd met her. Alexander Wilson, the HOA's vice president and a retired engineer who'd always been relatively civil, leaned forward. What exactly are you implying? I kept my voice level as I explained the situation. Their beloved clubhouse, the community's prized showpiece, had been illegally built on my land. I owned the ground beneath half the building, including most of their infinity pool and the entire eastern tennis court. That's ridiculous. Sophia snapped, her confidence finally cracking. The developer assured us all property lines were verified before construction. The developer made a critical mistake, I countered, sliding the certified survey toward her. This parcel was listed under a separate deed number due to a temporary transfer within my family back in the 60s. Their surveyors completely missed it. I looked each board member in the eye. And now you have a choice. You can either fully compensate me for the damage to my crops and agree to a new contract that respects my farm's operations, or I'll exercise my legal right to reclaim my land, which means everything on it gets removed. Sophia let out a nervous laugh, her eyes darting to the other board members as if searching for backup. You're not seriously thinking about tearing down $1 million clubhouse over a few rows of corn, are you? Keeping my voice level, I met her gaze. I've already filed all the necessary paperwork. You've got 48 hours to accept my terms, or I'll have my bulldozer clear out whatever's sitting on my property. Alexander Wilson, the vice president, leaned forward, his expression unreadable. What exactly are you asking for, Frank? I laid everything out in no uncertain terms. $50,000 to cover my destroyed crops and soil restoration. Barbara's immediate resignation from the board. A formal apology printed in the community newsletter. A new easement agreement allowing the clubhouse to stay, but with an annual payment of $15,000. And a written commitment to respect standard farming practices going forward. Barbara's face darkened, and she slammed her palm against the table. This is extortion. We'll file a countersuit for harassment. I kept my tone calm. Please do. I'd love the chance to explain to a judge how you personally trampled $32,000 worth of crops while trespassing, then had the nerve to bill me for towing fees. The board members scrambled to call an emergency executive session, asking me to step outside while they deliberated. Through the glass doors, I could see the discussion quickly turn into a shouting match. Sophia was practically flailing her arms, her face flushed with anger, while Alexander and two others seemed to be urging caution. The next morning, instead of the response I'd been hoping for, the HOA sent an official letter rejecting my so-called outrageous demands and threatening legal action. They accused me of fabricating boundary disputes and even making terroristic threats against community property. Sophia had managed to convince the board to dig in their heels rather than negotiate. The letter ended with a warning that any attempt to bring in construction equipment or do anything destructive near the clubhouse would result in immediate lawsuits and potential criminal charges. Frustrated but not surprised, I called Lucas. He let out a sharp breath, clearly annoyed. They're bluffing, Frank. The surveys don't lie. I'll file for an emergency injunction today to confirm your property rights and prove the encroachment. 3 days later, we stood in court. Judge Chloe Michaels, a no-nonsense woman with a background in dairy farming, reviewed the evidence. The HOA's attorney tried to argue for adverse possession and public necessity, but the judge tore their arguments apart with precise questioning. The encroachment hasn't even been there for 15 years, she pointed out. State law requires at least 20 years for an adverse possession claim. And public necessity? That applies to government agencies, not private homeowners associations. Her ruling was crystal clear. First, I owned the land. Second, the clubhouse was undeniably built on my property. Third, if the HOA refused to negotiate, I had every legal right to remove the structure myself. Fixing Sophia with a firm look, the judge made one final recommendation. I strongly encourage both parties to reach a settlement. Mr. Carter's property rights in this case are clear. With the law firmly on my side, I gave the HOA one last chance. My terms remained the same, $50,000 in damages, Barbara's resignation, a formal apology in the newsletter, an easement agreement with $15,000 in yearly payments, and a good neighbor policy acknowledging normal farming operations. I gave them 24 hours to decide. The judge had ruled that the deadline was reasonable under the circumstances. That evening, my phone started ringing. Residents had received an emergency HOA email from Barbara, painting me as a vindictive farmer trying to shake down the neighborhood. She also announced an immediate $2,000 special assessment per household to fund a legal fight against my so-called fraudulent claims. Several homeowners wanted to see my proof. I showed them the surveys, property records, and court ruling. Many were shocked by how Sophia had twisted the truth. By midnight, residents had organized their own emergency meeting, without Barbara, to discuss their options. The deadline came and went with no response. I had no choice but to act. At 7 a.m. the next morning, I fired up my yellow Caterpillar D8 bulldozer and rumbled down the main road toward the clubhouse. On either side of me, Lucas and the county sheriff accompanied me, both holding copies of the court order authorizing me to remove the encroachment. News had traveled fast. Local reporters lined the street, cameras rolling. Homeowners gathered to watch, their faces a mix of anger, curiosity, and, surprisingly, support. Now that the facts were out, many saw my side of things. Standing on the clubhouse steps, flanked by 2 security guards, Sophia looked both livid and panicked. She wore the same blue blazer she'd had on the day she destroyed my crops, a detail that wasn't lost on me. I brought the bulldozer to a stop right at the property line, its engine idling loudly. The sheriff approached Barbara, handing her the court order, while Lucas raised a bullhorn and addressed the crowd. This is your final chance to accept Mr. Carter's reasonable terms before the removal of the encroachment begins. Sophia snatched the stack of papers from my hand, her face twisting with rage. You'll regret this. We'll take you for everything you've got, she shrieked. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I shifted the bulldozer into gear, pressing forward as the heavy blade began lowering toward the corner of the infinity pool. The entire crowd went silent. The sharp edge of metal met concrete with a jarring impact. Cracks formed instantly, and water gushed out as the pressure split the pool wall. There was no joy in watching it happen, just a grim sense of justice. They had trampled all over my property, and now they were seeing the consequences firsthand. Just as the blade nudged against the clubhouse foundation, a man in a suit bolted from the gathered onlookers, waving his arms wildly. It was Alexander Wilson, the HOA's vice president. Stop. We accept your terms, he shouted. Within moments, he confirmed what I had already suspected. The board had voted to remove Sophia and agree to every condition I had set. I powered down the bulldozer. The actual damage was minimal, just a cracked section of the pool that could easily be repaired. Alexander explained that the homeowners had convened for an emergency vote that morning after thoroughly reviewing the court records and property documents overnight. A staggering 87% had voted in favor of removing Sophia from the board and accepting my terms. Security, the same ones who had been standing beside Sophia just moments ago, now escorted her off the property. She didn't go quietly, still yelling about lawsuits and vowing revenge on everyone involved. She climbed into her red Jeep, ironically, the same vehicle that had destroyed my crops, and sped off, tires screeching. The residents, without hesitation, broke into applause as she disappeared down the road. As the cheers died down, Alexander and Isabel Parker, the new acting board president and a retired judge, stepped forward. Extending her hand, Isabel addressed me formally. On behalf of Maple Creek Estates, we sincerely apologize for the damage to your crops and the blatant disregard for your property rights. We accept all of your terms and hope to rebuild a relationship of mutual respect. Not only did they agree to my original conditions, but they also proposed additional measures to strengthen the community's connection to its agricultural roots. They planned an annual Farm Heritage Day, where residents could learn firsthand about farming, a monthly farmers market in the clubhouse parking lot featuring my produce alongside other local growers, and educational programs with schools focused on sustainable agriculture and food production. To top it off, they decided to rename the community park to Carter Fields, as a tribute to my family's long-standing contributions to the land. Within a week, I received full compensation for my damaged crops. Their formal apology appeared both in the community newsletter and in a local newspaper. But the most unexpected gesture? A bronze plaque installed at the entrance to the neighborhood, honoring the land's rich farming history and recognizing the Carter family's role in it since 1937. As for Barbara, she wasted no time selling her house and moving to Florida. Last I heard, she was already at war with her new beachfront condo association over sea turtle lighting restrictions. Meanwhile, the relationship between my farm and Maple Creek Estates has never been better. Residents now appreciate and respect the rhythms of farm life. Many even volunteer during harvest season or bring their grandkids by to learn about agriculture. Farm Heritage Day has become the most anticipated community event, attracting visitors from nearby towns. The monthly farmers market thrives, giving me a direct-to-consumer revenue stream that has actually boosted my farm's profitability. Some residents have even started their own community garden plots, and I've been teaching them about sustainable growing practices. Most importantly, there's now mutual respect. The new HOA leadership understands that luxury homes and a working farm can exist side by side, so long as boundaries, both physical and social, are recognized and upheld. Even Jake, who initially urged me to sue for millions, admitted that this outcome was better. "You didn't just win, Grandpa," he told me. "You changed their perspective. That's worth more than money." Sometimes a bulldozer is the only way to make people listen. I never wanted to demolish their clubhouse, but I needed them to understand that generations of agricultural heritage can't just be erased by entitlement and ignorance. So if you're ever up against an HOA or anyone else who refuses to respect your property rights, remember this: know your boundaries, document everything, and stand your ground, even if it means rolling up in a bulldozer. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.